Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to work on this. So this was sent over by Mike over in the US. He hit up a gem show, snagged some of this beautiful Ethiopian Opal that we unboxed earlier on the channel, and having a look at it using Riley Gunn's insane upgrade pen light, I can have a look, and it's hard to show on camera, but there's only one area really that's causing me some kind of concern. And if I can get the color angle right, just here, there looks like there's a bit of sand that might come in somewhere about here and might maybe dive into the stone a little bit. But apart from that, I'm not seeing too much at all. You can see it just there. So it's an incredible colored stone. This little pen light is so good. Like if you shine it through here, you can see these tiny little spots. And that's enough for me to be able to get the light deep inside this stone and have a look. And I can really only see that one little section in here that might cause me an issue. So hopefully we will be perfectly fine. So the strategy is, for this kind of stone where you've got a dried Ethiopian opal, this is like jewelry grade level stuff. It's already dried, not cracking, not crumbling. What I want to do is get rid of all of this crust. So if you don't get rid of the crust and I chuck it in water and I cut everything wet rather than dry just for safety reasons, if you don't get rid of this and you just chuck this entire thing in water, the expansion of the opal versus the expansion of the crust can result in huge issues, huge cracks. So I want to free the opal from this, and then we've got room to breathe, and I'll be able to chuck this in water and then start the carving process. It's really soft kind of opal compared to Aussie opal, so it's not that difficult to cut. And also it's a lot cheaper getting this level of brightness and color in Ethiopian than it is in Australian, so it's definitely worth checking out and trying out if you haven't done so already, because you do get amazing color play and you get different patterns. Like these are really finger-like patterns which typically end up terminating in a honeycomb pattern along this edge, so we'll see if we get honeycomb along both of these edges. That would be absolutely ideal. This might end up being the ugliest face, who knows. So step one, let's get to picking away all of this crust as much as we can. I might have to do a little bit of dry carving just to grind it right back with a pretty high grit sintered diamond, probably with the yellow. This stuff should disappear pretty quick. I'm just hoping that I'll be able to snap some of it off kind of by hand or with a little metal pick. Maybe it'll be easy if I just grind this off with a dust mask on and the sintered diamond burr. We'll have a play and we'll see how easy it is. Now I'm only new to Ethiopian Opal, so my methods could be a bit dodgy, but they are working. So what I do first is pick off any of this loose material that I can. It comes off in reasonably good chunks sometimes. We get a really good satisfying chunk in a minute, but a lot of the time we are just kind of chipping away and grinding away. I like to kind of scribe around the outside of the opal, and that seems to help release it sometimes. So here I've done it, and then I just get the spoon end of my little spatula thing and just test a few areas. Keep picking away, and here you can see, boom, massive chunk comes off, and it comes off clean against the opal too. It's really nice. There are parts that just bury themselves in though, and as you'll see from the final shape of this opal, it was just a bit of an awkward diving in sand here and there kind of piece. So unfortunately it doesn't just peel all the way off, but here you can see it. That's what I've picked off. Now this part I'm always a little bit worried about, but first I'll just show you some of the satisfying big chunks that came off. That was the one we saw at the start. So you do get lucky sometimes, but a lot of it, you can see there's a lot of dust around there. So it does come off pretty flaky. Not a lot of chunks of opal, which was good. And I do a quick dry grind before I chuck it in the water. For this I was definitely wearing a mask. In fact, I used an upgraded mask to what I usually use. And you can see here, it just comes off as this light powder. So it doesn't really turn into a dust cloud anyway. It's a bit grainy, so that's not so bad. But this is the point where I get it to there, most of it's removed, and then I just chuck it underwater. And you'll see here, if you just focus on the edges, you'll see that they're starting to hydrate. So the water's starting to get in, and you're starting to get this clear outer edge. I can already see it at this point. Beautiful color. There's the fingers, there's some honeycomb on the edges, just like Pulitzer Opal always said. He always suspected that those fingers led to honeycomb, so if you're hunting honeycomb, definitely look for those. And here, we'll just speed up the footage and just soak it a little bit. You can see it's creeping in. This isn't sped up too much, this is only two times speed. And you can visibly just watch this thing start taking on the water. If you've got wet fingers and you're touching it dry, your fingers will start kind of sticking to the opal as well. It really does suck the water in. And then once it's hydrated a little bit inwards from all the edges, I feel like that's a good enough time to start carving. So what I do for this one is get the stylo out. The stylo's a little bit weaker than a rotary tool or a pendant motor. Pendant motor's the strongest, rotary tool's in between somewhere, and then the stylo is like a little engraving pen. It's much weaker. But I chucked the 600 grit sintered diamond on there. You can see the color is starting to fade away on those hydrated parts as well. So don't be too concerned. The color will look very bleak at some point. Once it's fully soaked through and that white core is gone, that frosty look, you will end up maybe seeing very little color, as we'll flash forward to in a minute. But just watching this soak in, it's actually quite satisfying to watch it soak in. But we don't have all day, so we've got to get to carving. Chuck your 600 grit on. It really doesn't need any coarser. Any coarser, and I think you just risk chipping off the opal too much. It's fairly brittle stuff. It's also very soft. It feels very lightweight as well. It's just very different to Australian opal. And here you can see the number one thing to do is just get rid of all of the sharp edges. We're going to use Nova points for the rest of this carving, so we've got to get rid of all these sharp edges. It will just cut through the resin points. And with the 600 grit, you kind of want to get rid of all of those inclusions. You can see them there, just below that floating hair for some reason. You can see all of those inclusions, all of those we want to get rid of with the 600 grit. You don't have to get rid of all of them. Technically, the 280 grit Nova can get rid of the last little bits and pieces if you've missed any. But anything visible, I would just get rid of with the 600 grit. It gets through it pretty quick. You'll see here, like even working on these edge ones, that was a fairly deep inclusion and it's really quickly gone. The footage is sped up, but only by 200% again, so 2 times speed. And you can just see here, even though I'm holding it very close to the edge of the camera, we're just working on those edges. Edges most important, get rid of those first, get rid of inclusion second, and then shaping is third. I'm going for a bit of a tumbled look on this one, just a really organic. Just want to see where the sand was eating into it and retain the entire shape of the opal. While we're working on this, you can see that it's still soaking and soaking. Still a fairly big core of white there in the middle. This is a big chunk of opal, so it's going to take a long time to get to the center, but that also means the drying is going to take a long time. Something that I don't deal with an Australian opal. With the Ethiopian opal, I have to have a drying time, so this video is going to be released on a delay just because I'm waiting for this thing to dry. Once it's soaked down to the core, it only takes maybe 10 minutes to soak right to the center. You can see there it's almost all the way in, but to dry that all the way out takes forever. Or at least it feels like forever. Really, it's just a couple days, which I'll show in a minute. So let it soak after the 600, 280 grit Nova. You can see here, don't panic, the color's almost gone. The red seems to stick around the most, the red and the green, but mostly red, which is, I don't know, pretty cool. But a lot of the color is gone, a lot of the pattern is gone. It's more of like a foggy kind of look, even though it's underwater. So it's a little bit concerning, but don't be too concerned. It will get better. You can see the honeycomb pattern starting to come through, but yeah, like I said, very blurry edges. 280 grit, finalize your shaping, finalize your inclusions, have a good look at the stone. We're keeping it wet for this entire process, so we're spending a lot of time. This is very free form, so a lot of time. I'm not even exaggerating, it takes hours to get this done. Just because I was scared and I'm not drying between stages, which I normally do. And to get through the whole thing, we're just hitting the entire surface of this stone, 600, 1200, 3000, 8,000, 14,000, 50,000. I actually don't think you need to do all of these. In fact, I skipped the 8,000, just went from the 3,000 through to the 14,000 and the 50,000. But this is the full range of Nova points between 280 grit and the 50,000. So I just go through all of them from 600 to 50,000 after the 280. And we end up with a fairly nice stone. It's just that it took me, many an hour. I carved this over 2 days pretty much. Just because my fingers kept getting too soggy and I cut off the circulation to my leg. Alright, now we're done with all of those Nova points. Went up to 50,000. I'll make a quick few predictions before we go to dry this. I reckon the drying process won't have any problems at all. So I'm just going to literally sit it out on a bench on top of a piece of tissue or wrap it up in a tissue just in case, and just keep it protected and let it dry out overnight because it's nice and cool overnight. And I can tell you why I'm pretty confident in it. But before I do that, I'll also say that I reckon there are going to be parts that are going to have some small scratches or not sand spots, but maybe some small pits, possibly in these deeper kind of valleys. Because I've kept this wet, and with Australian Opal I always like to dry between stages to make sure I haven't missed anything, but this one I'm kind of blind because I've kept it wet. I've gone pretty excessive in the timings for most of the burrs, so I think it should be semi-decent. But it's really hard to tell. This is it underwater, this is it just out of the water. I'll give it a quick little dry off camera to show you what it looks like in terms of polish. And then we'll just let it sit out and dry. So that's it, dry on the outer surface. And it doesn't look too bad. It's taken a pretty good shine. But when it fully dries out, it'll look completely different to what it does now. So I'll let it dry now and we'll come back and I'll tell you why I think it'll dry with no problems. And if it shatters apart, then I'll have to backtrack on that. Catch you in a second. Right, so 48 hours after I was previously talking to you guys, I've just left it on the bench wrapped up in this tissue, and here we go. It's looking pretty good. I reckon it might have a little bit of drying left to go just because the center point of it is pretty thick. So I reckon it'll get a little bit darker and a little bit brighter, but as you can see, it is quite nice. This is the part that was exposed when it was rough. So you can see that there's all these little fingers, and those fingers, as Pulitzer correctly predicts, typically terminates in a honeycomb pattern, which I do have, but because I've cut it in a way that it's all curvy and undulating, it means that instead of honeycomb, I get a bit more of my favorite kind of style, which is more of a jigsaw kind of pattern. But there are parts that are clearly very honeycomb. So if I were to cut it very flat, you would get just that straight up honeycomb, but I prefer this almost tumbled look. And I was saying that I would probably get some spots that were pretty dodge, and I'm not actually seeing too many. It's turned out quite spectacular. Very bright. It is very nice to every now and then just do a little bit of Ethiopian Opal because it's so different. But as you can see, it did take 2 days to dry. I was really confident. I mentioned it just before. I was really confident that this would dry okay. And why is that? In the shed, I've had a few weeks where you string together 50 degrees Celsius days. I'll convert that for the Americans, but it is hot. And I typically keep stones that I'm working on in a little container of water. Just because they're not finished yet, might as well just store them in water. And unfortunately, this one was in a little container and it completely dried out. It just completely evaporated after the sintered diamond stage. So it was like the worst possible time to let it dry. And it dried, and guess what? No problems, no cracks, not a single issue. It was just a frosted looking lump. So I couldn't believe it. I chucked it straight back in water, checked to see if there was any cracks, anything at all. Didn't happen. So I was quite confident this one would dry. I'll put up a quick little clip of what it was like overnight after the initial cut and then 24 hours later. It's actually quite interesting how long it takes for something like this to dry, because it's not a very thin piece, it's not a very standard shape. So there are some pretty thick parts to get to the center, right in the center here, because this part sticks up quite a bit. It is quite a big stone still. Ethiopian Opal to me feels a lot lighter though, so that's a little bit strange. And all in all, yeah, it's turned out quite good. There's a couple tiny areas that I want to deal with. And one other thing that I'm noticing just playing with this stone now is that it does, like, my fingers aren't very sweaty. It's not very hot today, and it's currently nighttime, so it's already cooled down from the heat of the day. And I can feel this kind of sticking. It is trying to suck any little bit of sweat off my fingers it can get. So it is always a bit of a weird feeling, and I'm not a huge fan of it. But you can't deny that the color is absolutely wonderful, and it's dried up really well. No careful drying method for this one. Just literally just wrapped it up in this tissue, sat it on the bench, and it sat there for 2 days until now. And we've got a nice little piece. So there you go. Bit of Ethiopian Opal. Like to mix it up every now and then, and Very, very nice. Mike will be happy to see it. I've already got some other videos on the go for the Ethiopian Opal, but for now I'll just release this one because the others I'm basically waiting for a few failed attempts and stuff, so I can really dive into the issues surrounding Ethiopian Opal a lot more and showcase a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, I'm going to go work on a little bit of Boulder Opal. I'll also say that I'm very happy with how the 50,000 Nova finishes it off. I haven't had to use any kind of metal oxide on this. So that's a little added tip there. Maybe just stick to the Nova points if you're going to work Ethiopian. It does an incredibly good job polishing up to 50,000 grit. But on that note, have fun with your carving and I'll see you next time.